So we're going to talk about trimming goats' feet. And that's important, especially I think in New England where we have animals inside during the winter and they're not out walking around, because the goat really is an animal that's made to be outdoors, walking on rocks and gravel and pasture and so forth. And so in the winter when they're confined, the hoofs tends to grow a lot. And so if you've got goats, you pretty much got to make yourself aware of the fact that you're going to need to do hoof trimming, and probably every 2 to 3 months. You'll have to see how they grow and what looks normal. And by doing this, it keeps the better hoof health, and the animal can walk more natural and so forth. And it's just a needed practice with dairy goats.
Today we're going to talk about how to properly handle a goat with the goat hoof and how to actually trim a goat hoof.
Now, one thing that I've found, and Sue is here, my wife is helping me, a person holding them is a better solution than tying them up. Now, sometimes people will put them in a milking stand, but then the goat may develop a fear of being milked if they have a bad experience in the stand. Sometimes you chain them up, but they sometimes thrash around. And something about the personal touch of a person, consoling them and being with them, I found goes a lot better. Starting at the top, this is actually the Dewclaw. This kind of helps an animal if they're sliding down a hill or something, that kind of grabs in. That's the Dewclaw. And then the heel is a fleshy portion, which I take a little bit of that off to level the foot. And you got the sidewall tissue. And then you've got the center pad of the foot. And then the toe. And then the sole. And then is, just like you might know of dogs and cats, the quick. That means that the blood flow isn't too far under there. So we have to be careful as we trim that we don't gouge into that. And so I have some tools. In fact, first of all, I'm going to mention it doesn't hurt to wear safety goggles just because a goat may move. And then I often wear gloves. Again, a goat can move around, and if you're using sharp tools, you might jab your hand, so just some old leather gloves. And then my tool of choice are these pruning, and you buy them at a feed store. They're really made for doing hoofs. They're a little bit more rugged, a little bit different than just a shrub pruner. I have used the hoof paring knife in the past, but there's more chance of cutting. But it does have a little hook on the end of that tool, which I sometimes use for cleaning the hoof. And then when I'm done the whole thing, sometimes this is just a knurled edge block plane. This is just a woodworking tool, but it can plane it a little bit just to give you a nice finish. And then it doesn't hurt to have an antiseptic or a stop bleed product or something on hand, because sometimes you do hit something you don't intend to. I pour it on, and then I have a paper towel ready, and then I blot it and kind of stay with her until I'm sure that that's okay. So it's important just to go in small amounts so you don't have an accident. Okay, so we're trimming the front foot, and once again, you find if a person's holding the goat, that helps versus being hitched up. And we're trying to get some of this outside material cut. And it's better to choose your days for this, because the really cold weather, it'll be hard to do. Okay, and then I take a little bit off the heel, because you want to try to get a level foot. So now I'm going over to the other side wall. I take a little off the toes, but like I say, if you were showing, they probably wouldn't want you to do this, but just for a functional purpose. And I like to get as much of the sidewall trimmed down as I can. So on a really cold day, these tissues kind of freeze up. And it would be harder than this. So then I like to use my little block plane. And you can see things are starting to get kind of pink. So that means we're getting a little close to the blood vessel area. I'd like to trim up this little heel just a little bit. This is why I like the block plane, because you can get down pretty close and not be cutting something. So now we've got a pretty good hoof. It's looking kind of like what a baby hoof would. We got the side walls. We got the center part here, the pad. The heel has been leveled down. And I've taken a little bit off the toe, so it's not going to continue to grow. And you can see we're getting a little bit fleshy. So that's about as far as we want to go.
Is the heel and the toe supposed to be like on a level
Try to be.
plane?
Try to be.
That's the idea.
You try to
there.
be. You're right. And
Okay.
so you take this is a little bit fleshy. And like I say, I take a little off the ends, but if you were showing in a show ring, you probably wouldn't do that cut off. You'd want to follow a little more, because they're going to be judging you. But just for routine maintenance, I snip a little off the toes, a little off the heels, the sidewalls, and then that gets you starting to get down to the soft part. Then that's when I like to use the plane.
I see. And try to make it as
Level as you can, and it also lets you take small increments so you're not cutting. It's really easy to get the cut and they would start bleeding. That's happened to me.
So I noticed here on the toe you were cutting off, and this material was all black. And
Yeah.
so as you cut into it, it's almost like this milky or clear material, and it's not pink or anything like that.
No.
And if you're getting into the pink section, what do you do?
Well, this is why you don't want to go too far. You're starting to get into the blood vessel part, so you might hit some vessels, and so you don't want to overdo that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've got a little older goat, and she's only been like 2 or 3 months since she was pruned, but her hoofs are growing fairly fast. Not quite the nice shape you see on a young goat. Again, I'm going to take the sidewall down, a little bit off the heel, clean out the pad. I really like to get the sidewall trimmed down. I'm going to take a little off the toe. And you can see how fleshy. This stuff just grows right out. This is just a few months. Clean out the residual there. Get a nice cut. Okay, a little bit off the heel. I don't want to overdo it. Now I go to my plane. And a plane is especially good with younger 4-H'ers and so forth, because you can get pretty close and not be damaging anything. And you can see it gives a nice surface. You can see I'm wearing my gloves again. Safety goggles, not a bad idea. You just never know when the goat might jump. And these goats get pruned fairly regularly. And you can see she's behaving pretty good. But having that person massaging her and patting her is a whole lot better than if she was just tied. I really like the surface that this block plane leaves. And you can see I'm getting down kind of pinkish, and I would be scared to be using a knife at this point. And so I've got I want a pretty level hoof. And she's behaving pretty good. Okay, so now here we are. We've got the heel trimmed down. We've taken the sidewalls down a little bit off the toe. And then we're going to finish it up with this block plane because I want it nice and level for her walking. And also I don't want places sticking out that accumulate manure and stuff where she walks. I want it smooth. This is an older goat, and we're looking at her because admittedly she has misshapen feet. I got her old. She was old. Her feet had not been taken care of well. And where we've seen on the other goats, kind of a nice uniform hoof, with this one, and she grows out a lot too. This was all pruned the same as everybody else. And she's got a lot of growth there. And if you don't take care of this, it can lead to foot rot or, lameness. And you can't correct everything at once. You have to do what you can. So we're getting that sidewall cleaned up, cleaning out the middle. And then we want to trim up the other sidewall. So that's coming around pretty good. And like I say, with this goat with these misshaped feet, it's a real challenge. In fact, sometimes they have to get even bigger equipment, bigger clippers. And we'll just do what we can here, but you start to get manure collecting in the pad. And you want to clip off the sides.
How often should we be trimming the hooves?
As far as frequency, I think every 2 to 3 months, and you'll learn by your own goats. Even within my group, this one that we just did last, the older goat, hers seemed to grow faster than the younger goats. And younger goats seem to grow more uniformly, easy to trim. And if you stay on top of it, and I'll admit, I tend to stretch it too long sometimes, but if you stay on top of it, you haven't got to deal with a lot of that side tissue. It's not as thick, and you can pare it down. And then, like I say, I like that little planing at the end to kind of smooth them out.
And what are the signs that the hoofs need to be trimmed?
Well, when you look at your goats and you're trying to decide if they're willing to be trimmed, see how the toes are growing out. That's a real indicator. That's very obvious. They'll tend to be curling up and getting long. And then if you stop and lift the foot up, that's when you'll see this tissue growing under. In fact, sometimes you can see that tissue rolling under on the sidewall, even on a side view. And you really don't want the tissue growing under. These, I've held these for trimming here today. They were just about at the right phase. The older goat was really beyond what was the right phase. But she's in seems to have a different growth pattern on her foot than the others. So, we were talking about trimming goat feet, and that if you raise goats, that's a chore you need to plan on because their feet grow out. They're used to being on rough terrain, and when they're on soft bedding like we have over the winter, especially in pasture, sometimes they grow out. So every couple of 3 months, you ought to have a regular routine of trimming your feet on your goats. And if you don't do this, you could have hoof rot and misshapen feet, which leads to lameness, and the goats won't be as productive.